Alright, it's time to talk about my favorite character that I've ever made. The Headless Hunk. Sorry, the handsome horse. Headless Horseman. There we go. I know what you're thinking, and it's exactly what you're thinking. I'm a bit of a monster effer. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I mean, look at him. He's a beefcake. Can you blame me? Just like my other fairy tale character that I revamped, this one is based off of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. You may know this story from, of course, its Disney movies or other movie or TV show iterations, but the true story is about a headless Hessian soldier that rode upon a horse and haunted the town of Sleepy Hollow, New York. A Hessian is a German soldier that was hired to fight in the Revolutionary War by the British because they didn't have any allies to help them fight. They were known to be quite ruthless, very well-trained soldiers, reasons that we'll get into a little bit later. There is actually a real, previously unmarked grave near the town of Sleepy Hollow in which a headless Hessian soldier lies, whose head was blown off by a cannonball in the Battle of the White Plains. This is my boy Conrad, and just like the original story, he is a Hessian soldier. Here I'm just doing some little sketches to get back into his character and get a feel for him again. Very moody and trying to decide his body type a little bit. I knew I wanted him to be big. This man was 6'9" in his original life, now cut down to 6 foot for obvious reasons. I wanted him to be thick, muscular, but not like a bodybuilder, more like a strong man. He's got a little bit of punch to him. He's got those soft, big muscles that aren't always completely visible, but you can just look at him and tell that this man is like 300 pounds and could probably crush me between his thighs. Of course, in his undeath, some supernatural powers have made him quite a bit stronger. Even when he was alive, he was quite a big, strong man. In life, he was blonde. He had long blonde locks, beautiful L'Oreal locks, and he had blue eyes and was generally pretty handsome. A little rough around the edges, but handsome. Here you'll see me redesigning his clothing. It's not too far off from his original design, but it is a little more accurate to real-life sources now. You know, you can't really be too original with a uniform. I would decide to use his undead form to express my creativity upon him by making the uniform quite asymmetrical, torn and tattered, bloody. Asymmetricality in character design is usually a sign of an evil or dark character. Later on, you'll also see that I have changed his weapon. I've given him a military saber like he would have had when he was in the military, something super sharp, slightly curved, good for cutting off heads, and I would also give him ghostly chains instead of physical ones that were granted to him by death itself. Another thing death gave him is his necklace that you see that allows him to have sight and hearing, though it is a little clunky because he does have to pivot completely in order to see things. His field of view isn't very good, and he also has a bit of a fisheye lens, so he's not the most dexterous character ever. He relies mostly on brute force and strength. You can see his uniform. It originally started off as red and blue, which I thought was correct, but it turns out Hessian soldiers wore green and red. So this was a bit of a weird color scheme, you know, very Christmassy, I guess, very bright. I would manage to tone this down by making it very worn, very old, and I felt a bit more content with the color scheme once I desaturated it. And his trusty steed would also get a redraw. It's not quite finished yet, but I just wanted to show you because look at this horse. Like, horses are hard to draw, man. Also, I'm a horse girl. What can I say? You'll also see me design his current outfit for the new world that he lives in, as all of my fairy tale characters have been transported into a new dimension in which they all exist together and have to find out how to get back home. So, to give you some background on Conrad, like I said, he's a Hessian soldier. The reason why they are called Hessians is because about, I want to say, half of all the German hired soldiers were from Hesse-Kassel, a German state, before Germany would become a country. In Hesse-Kassel, they train their men to be soldiers from the age of 6. And by the time they are 16, they are expected to sign up for potential wars and battles. Conrad grew up as a stable hand for his father that raised war horses. Eventually, Conrad would raise a small Frisian foal into being his companion. This horse was extra difficult, likely wasn't going to be able to see any action because he simply would not listen to any of the men at the farm. However, Conrad decided to take him on as his special project and would name him Nell. Nell would become Conrad's best friend. They would form a bond like no other, and Nell would become exclusively Conrad's horse. While working at this farm, a somewhat wealthy family would come along to buy a war horse for their son, and Conrad would meet Lily. Lily is a small, spunky little raven-haired girl who just absolutely won Conrad's heart over, and within a short period of knowing each other, Conrad would propose to her. However, shortly after their very short-lived marriage, the British would call for aid from the Germans. Being of age, Conrad would get inducted into the military and be sent across seas to America. Let me tell you, Conrad is a certified wife enjoyer. He would do anything for his wife. He is loyal. He is the husband of all time, okay? They were both devastated. But luckily, Conrad would be able to bring Nell with him so that become part of the mounted Jaeger regiment. Him and his wife would write little letters back and forth when he could receive them to stay in contact, but eventually the letters would start to peter off. Ultimately, he would receive the news that his wife passed of tuberculosis. This was in the year of 1776, so such a disease was rampant and not curable at the time, unfortunately. Of course, he was insanely distraught by this news. All he had wanted to do was go home and be with her. That was his motivation for surviving this war, and he didn't even get to say goodbye to her. Very soon after, he would have to go and fight in the Battle of the White Plains. Just like the original story, he would be decapitated in this battle. However, I did change it. Instead of a cannonball, I wanted to keep his head intact for story reasons. So, unfortunately, Nell would be struck by the cannonball. He would be flung off of his horse, receive dire injuries, and be left behind by the rest of his battalion. The American soldiers would find him. They would sort of do a mix of putting him out of his misery and also taking a bit of a trophy for scaring off what were considered to be the scariest enemies to face by taking his head. Now, Conrad was dying, and he thought, at least I can be with my wife. When he would pass, his body would be considered desecrated. So when he would come face to face with death, death was unable to take him to the afterlife. However, death does feel some mercy at times, or perhaps cruelty. He would tell Conrad that he could find his head and have a chance to move on to the afterlife, but otherwise he would be stuck in this purgatory. So he was left, but not without companionship. No felt such a loyalty to his master that he would stay behind with Conrad and accompany him throughout his undeath. And so he would become a vengeful ghost of Sleepy Hollow, a Dullahan, that would ride throughout the nights and signify the ends of people's lives, whether it be those who had desecrated his corpse or even just their ancestors hundreds of years later. If they were to wander into the forests of Sleepy Hollow, they were likely to be met with an unfortunate fate, for as long as the Headless Horseman had no head, he would be taking the ones that he could have. This kind man had been transformed into a terrible, angry, vengeful being that had a bloodlust. For hundreds of years, he would haunt Sleepy Hollow until some unknown force would take him into the alternate dimension in which all of the other fairy tales live. When he arrived, he realized, I don't feel the presence of my head anymore, and wonder, did it get left behind in his old fairy tale? Was it here and perhaps missing? This would only make him angrier. So he would ride endlessly throughout the forest there, trying to find a way back home, trying to find a way to find his head, anything, because all he wanted was to die. He just wanted to be with Lily and finally rest and not feel this pain and this anger anymore. He had no such luck, unless you count him coming upon a certain Snow Queen, a witch who had also suffered losing her husband, a witch who had also lived longer than she ever would have wished, and a witch who wasn't scared of him. Her name is Agnete. In spite of their complexities, or perhaps because of them, they would manage to become companions of a sort. A very, very slow burn romance that became my favorite ship of all time. He still has not found his head, and although she has now quote-unquote domesticated him, as her creator likes to say, there is still a part of him that longs to at least be normal again. He doesn't know what would even happen if he found his head. Would death's promise to him ring true and he would be able to die? If he went to the afterlife in this world, would it even be the same one as Lily? Or maybe he could just live the life that was stolen from him, just in a slightly different way. The future is uncertain for him, but he does know that perhaps all isn't lost. I hope you found my character to be interesting. Of course, if you have any questions, I know some of my backstory might be confusing out of context, and I would love to tell you more about them. So feel free to leave a comment below, and make sure you click the subscribe button if you would like to hear about more of my characters, or perhaps more about the ones I've already told you and the world that they now live in. Thank you to my Ko-fi supporters, and of course, if you would like to support me similarly, consider checking out my Ko-fi memberships, where I offer early access and other nice little perks and free art just for you. Thank you guys so much for all the love on my recent videos. I can't believe I'm almost at like 1,000 subscribers. Like, just started last month. Like, what the heck? And I hope you enjoy this one just as much. In the meantime, I hope you all have a lovely, lovely week ahead of you, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.